All right, diving in today, going to look at something pretty wild. How the human body, how it holds up or doesn't when we're talking about space travel,
Yeah.
long-term stuff. Got some really cool material to dig into here.
Looking forward to it.
Goal's simple, right?
Yeah.
We want to understand what astronauts are really up against, not just the pretty pictures. What happens when you're months away from Earth? What does that actually do? So muscles, bones, hearts, balance, even the immune system.
A lot to cover. It speaks to how adaptable we are as a species.
It really does. But as you say, there are real consequences. Like
Yeah.
with our muscles and skeletal system, that's a big one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Gravity. We take it for granted down here, but up there, it's a different story.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Your leg muscles, for example, they work against gravity constantly here. But in space, they're basically on a permanent break. Studies have shown that you can lose a significant amount of muscle mass, like up to 20% in a matter of months, especially in those weight-bearing areas.
Wow, 20%. That's a lot.
Yeah. It is. And at the same time, your bones, which rely on gravity to maintain their density, they start to weaken too, losing about 1% of bone mass each month. It's kind of like a reverse workout, right?
So less muscle, weaker bones.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be, yeah. There's a real risk of fractures and other injuries both during and after the mission. That's why astronauts have those super intense exercise routines.
Right, they're always working out on the space station.
Yeah, they use special equipment like the ARD, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device. It's basically a high-tech weightlifting system built for zero gravity.
And even with all that, coming back to Earth is rough, right?
It can be. Recovery takes time, months or even years, and some bone density loss might be permanent. It's a long-term commitment, that's for sure.
It's a lot to consider. And speaking of long-term impacts, what about our internal systems? Like what happens to our heart and blood flow when there's no down?
Well, without gravity to keep things pulled down, fluids shift upward. That's why you see those pictures of astronauts with slightly puffy faces. It's because blood and other fluids are accumulating in the upper body. And the opposite happens in the legs. They have less fluid. To adapt, the body actually reduces its total blood volume and the heart itself changes. Doesn't have to work so hard to pump against gravity. It can actually become a bit more spherical and even lose a little mass.
So the heart actually changes shape. That's wild.
It is, yeah. And all of this contributes to a common problem astronauts face upon returning to Earth: orthostatic intolerance. Basically, dizziness and even fainting when they stand up. Their cardiovascular system just isn't used to dealing with gravity's pull anymore.
Makes sense. So how do they deal with that?
Well, there are a few things they do. They have devices that apply negative pressure to the lower body, kind of like a suction, to try and simulate the effects of gravity. And of course, they have specialized exercise routines for the cardiovascular system, too. And even simple things like increasing salt and fluid intake before they come back can help.
It's amazing the lengths they have to go to just to function normally again.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how crucial gravity is. Okay, so we talked about strength, circulation. What about our sense of balance? That whole system, it's got to be thrown for a loop in space.
Oh, absolutely. The inner ear, the vestibular system, it relies on gravity to tell us which way is up. In microgravity, those signals get all messed up. That's why many astronauts experience space motion sickness early on with nausea and disorientation. But even after they adapt to space, coming back to Earth can cause similar problems. Their coordination and balance can be off for weeks as their brains relearn how to deal with gravity.
So it's not just learning to float around, it's learning how to walk again, too. Intense.
It is. Pre-flight training can help a little by exposing astronauts to disorienting environments here on Earth. And during the mission, they do sensory stimulation exercises to try and keep the system sharp. But it's complex, and full recovery just takes time. The brain has to recalibrate.
Wow, that is fascinating. And finally, I wanted to touch on something we don't always think about: the immune system. I know you've mentioned that space travel can actually weaken our defenses.
It's a serious concern, yeah. Extended spaceflight can lead to something called immune dysregulation. Essentially, the immune system starts to malfunction. We see things like latent viruses reactivating and changes in the levels of important signaling molecules called cytokines. It seems like a lot of factors contribute to this: the stress of the mission, radiation exposure, disrupted sleep cycles. All of these can suppress immune function, which means astronauts are more susceptible to infections.
So they're more vulnerable up there. That's pretty scary. What are they doing to protect themselves?
Well, research is ongoing, looking at different ways to support the immune system, things like nutritional supplements and even medications. And constant monitoring is key. They carefully track immune markers in astronauts throughout the mission to understand how things are changing and hopefully develop more effective countermeasures.
It's just incredible to think about all the challenges, the interconnected challenges that our bodies face in space. It's definitely not as simple as just strapping in and enjoying the ride.
Right, there's so much more to it than that. It requires a deep understanding of human physiology and constantly pushing the boundaries of what we know to develop new strategies and technologies to make long-duration space travel safer and more sustainable.
This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes, I have to say. It makes you wonder, with all these changes, these profound and interconnected changes, what are the real implications of sending humans on, say, a multi-year mission to Mars? What are the long-term consequences we're going to have to grapple with? It's pretty mind-blowing to think about, really. Thanks for breaking it all down with me.
Of course, happy to. It's a topic that definitely deserves more attention. There's a lot we still don't know and a lot more we need to learn.
Definitely. And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with that thought. Until next time, keep looking up and keep exploring the wonders of the universe. And maybe take a moment to appreciate the incredible resilience of the human body.
Couldn't agree more.
See you next time.
See you then.